So you can actually you can leave your cameras on or off. It only records the screen of the person who's speaking. Um, so my name is Claire. I coordinate the biodiversity themes. So myself and my colleague Rob Nelson, who's in a different breakout room, will be your kind of main point of contact for all of your work on this theme. I'm just going to take you through the 7 steps of the program and how to go about completing it. If you do have questions, we're a relatively small group, so feel free to interrupt me if you like, if it's something relevant to the point I'm speaking about, or I will try to have time at the end. I tend to ramble a bit, so I'm trying to be better at being finishing this on time because we're all going to get pulled back to the main room in 40 minutes. We will share these slides with you at the end, and Sheila might be adding some links into the chat as we go. So I do have a lot of resources mentioned in this PowerPoint, but they will all be linked. Okay, so just as a reminder, as Joanne already said, this is the 10th theme of the program. So you're kind of in rare air. Not many schools have gotten this far. It's only our 4th year having this as a national theme. So um it's really impressive. I think all the schools that are on this are kind of experts at this. You probably don't need much information from me. But once you are finished this flag, you won't be moving on to another. So it's kind of a closed circle. We move on to a new phase of projects. So um hopefully it's one that you enjoy. It's a nice kind of practical theme. So it's following on from biodiversity, which was the 5th theme of the program. So you'll kind of have noticed that the first 5 themes, we call them our core themes, and then the next 5 kind of look back at those initial themes with a global perspective. So when your school was on biodiversity, it would be looking at all aspects of it. So all of the different variety of life forms, um, and the main kind of overall message of that theme, that the more diversity we have, the better. So the more different kinds of plants and animals, flowers, lichens, bacteria, all of those things, the better. And then when it came to looking at the next theme, there was lots of different areas of biodiversity we could have focused on. Like there's so many reasons, obviously, why it's important, from providing the food that we eat, medicines we take, clean air, products, and well-being. There's tons of different areas to hone in on there, but we decided to go with the connections between food and biodiversity. We kind of felt it ticked a lot of boxes in terms, both in terms of how it connected with the other flags, and also the potential benefits for students working on the theme. So you'll see as you go through it that it links really well with all of the other flags. So litter and waste, there's a lot of connections between packaging on foods as well as food waste itself. I know this is becoming a hot topic, especially for the schools who are moving on to the hot meals, hot lunch scheme, are very aware of this. There's loads of connections between energy, in terms of the energy used to process food, refrigerate it, and produce it. Connections with water in terms of the water needed to produce our food. Um, Connections with travel in terms of food miles. That's a really interesting one you can focus on. And obviously with biodiversity itself. And then we felt it would give a great opportunity for students to really learn some practical skills in terms of gardening, growing their own food, and also cooking with them. And there's so many benefits. There's been so many studies in terms of the benefits students get from not just being outside, but also getting their hands, in the soil. So that's why we decided to go with it. And now I'll just take you through the 7 steps themselves. So, as you're probably all aware, we have the exact same 7 steps for each theme on the Green Schools program. So, step 1 is always to set up your Green Schools committee. And schools have committees in lots of different ways, but the 2 essential things your committee must have are students and a coordinator. And we really want the students to be as involved as possible in the decision making, the planning, spreading the word, all of that stuff. And then after that, you can divide your committee up in different ways. You can add extra members. It's probably really helpful, especially for larger schools, to have more than one staff member on the committee, even just to spread the work out a bit. Um, I'd really recommend for this team in particular that if you have a caretaker or somebody who works on the grounds, to kind of keep them in the loop as much as you can. And potentially, they're probably not going to be able to come to all of your committee meetings, but just to kind of communicate with them about any changes you want to make in terms of creating spaces for growing your food, or anything you want to do with the biodiversity of your grounds. It's really helpful to have that person on board. Um, it's also nice to maybe reach out to parents of students or community members that might be helpful for you on this team. So if anybody's parents are farmers or chefs or work in, the food industry, or even if they're just keen gardeners, again, they probably can't be a full-time committee member, but they might be willing to come in and give a talk or do a workshop or get involved in some ways. And then maybe you break up the committee and have different roles for students, or if you have a really big school with a big committee, you might have subcommittees where a group of students, the sixth class students, are responsible for keeping up with all your litter and waste actions, or you might have roles in a secondary school like a secretary, chairperson, etc. Okay, so once you have your committee up and running, you're on to step two. So step two is your environmental review. So this is basically just having a look at what the situation is in your school before you take any actions. Um, and you'll see kind of sometimes I kind of catch myself with the language that we use, but I say here that there's two essential actions. So what I mean by essential is it's something you'll be asked about when you come to apply for your flag. So these are things that you must kind of document and keep a record of. So the two essential actions for this theme are to carry out an awareness survey, and to create a food habitat map. And I'll show you both of those in more detail now in a sec. And then there's also lots of other things you can do to further assess, what the situation is in your school before you start. Like you can look at your soil in depth, you can look at the biodiversity in your grounds in more detail. And we do have workshops to help you with both of these things as well. But it's optional in the sense that you don't have to do it. You won't be penalized for not doing it when you come to apply. But they're things that can go on your action plan, for example. So we'll just go back to these essential actions on the awareness survey. So this summer, we actually changed the awareness survey a little bit. So you can see I've labeled this 2023 survey. Um, I mentioned at the beginning that this is only our fourth year on of this theme, so we're still kind of taking feedback on it. And we did get some feedback on the survey that it was maybe a bit too long. Some of the questions were confusing. So during the summer, we changed it by basically removing questions 4 and 5, so that the new survey is just 5 questions. Now, if you are on your second year on the theme, or if you carried out that survey last year, you can choose to do the same one again, or you can do this shorter one. It's up to you. And in the application form, there'll be options for doing either one. So don't worry if you carried out that survey last year. The content of the questions remaining are the same. We've just taken two out. Um, so Sheila might share with you in the chat the link to the new survey, and you'll see on that new survey it'll connect you to the old one as well, so you can find either. And I also have a link to it in this presentation, so you'll get it at the end. So that's the survey. Don't feel you have to do it with every single student in your school, especially if you're a big school, but try and get a good selection of different age groups. Because when you repeat this survey in your second year, we'll get back to that step later, you want to have a good way of comparing and contrasting. And also, if you're doing it with very young students, don't be afraid to help them out with the language a bit. You can kind of break down these questions and what biodiversity means and so on if you're speaking to a young child, if they're struggling to understand. Okay, so that's the survey. Once you have that done, you can move on to your food habitat map. So what a food habitat map is basically a visual representation of your school grounds that shows the different habitats that you have and anything connected with food or growing. So most schools will do like a bird's eye view sketch of the school, that shows, the buildings, if you have like playing fields, you have a hedgerow, um, and then if you can map out, if you already have places that you grow food, like maybe your school is lucky enough to already have some raised beds, um, you would put them on the map. If you already have things like fruit trees that are growing, wild food like blackberries or nettles that are there, you'd mark them on the map. And if you don't have those types of things, you'd be using this map to assess where can we add growing spaces um in our school grounds. And I'll talk about these in more detail. You don't need to add raised beds or polytunnels for this theme. We've tried to set it out in such a way that you can do it, um, in pots and planters and things that don't require a lot of investment. You can also mark things on your map that are in your school, like if you have a canteen, or if you have like compost bins, that kind of thing, anything connected with food. And we have got a pretty thorough resource that takes you through what to do in the classroom to prepare a checklist or what to look for outside and so on. So that's available by clicking that blue link there. And a couple of years ago, we did a 1 hour teacher training seminar just on how to make these habitat maps. So you can watch the recording back by clicking that link. And here's just a nice example of a map that a school made where they have their kind of basic information sketched in the middle, and they hung that up on their notice board. And then as the year went on, they were adding little photographs around the edge that showed what they'd planted, or they added like a bug hotel and a little water feature, so they put in those features there. So your grounds will obviously change throughout the year, so it's a good way of keeping it fresh. So those are the two essential parts of our review, and then you're on to the action plan. And the action plan, you're setting out everything that you want to accomplish as you're working on the theme. Probably what you are doing will fit into one of two main aims, either increasing awareness or increasing practical knowledge and skills. So the awareness we're trying to aim for in this theme are kind of the environmental impacts of the whole food industry. So from growing to processing, etc. And this is kind of the global citizenship area of the theme. It's how our diets have a global impact. And it's also looking at the positives in terms of how biodiversity actually helps us produce food, from pollinators to life in the soil, to natural predators and so on. And then the practical skills we're looking at working in the garden and potentially making some recipes with the food that has been grown as well. So this theme is a little bit different to some of the others in that it's very much linked to the seasons. So there's kind of a growing calendar in Ireland in terms of when we can plant things and when we can harvest them. So that makes it a little bit more prescriptive. Um, and so this is a really basic summary of what we kind of advise you focus on throughout the 2 year cycle. So this is kind of loose. You can obviously change it to what suits you, but we would suggest that to start off in your first year, that you're spending autumn and winter kind of introducing the school to the theme, getting used to it, doing your environmental review and starting to scope out where you might be able to grow things and how. And then spring and summer, you're growing and looking after your crops, harvesting them. And then in your second year, in that autumn winter timeline, this is when you're looking at maybe the global citizenship part, and you're studying something that impacts, or that the ways that food impacts our environment. And I'll show you some resources on that in a few minutes. And then again in spring and summer is when you're hopefully growing and harvesting. And just to highlight here that this kind of set in your second year, you'll probably be applying for your green flag and filling out your application before you get to plant a single crop. So don't worry about that. We understand that that's happening. There's just kind of nothing we can do to change the timeline there. You can include your plans for it. So just go into a bit more detail on the crops that we recommend that you plant. Again, this is just our recommendations. You can plant anything that you like. We've chosen these particular crops because they fit reasonably well into a school's calendar, and most of them are things that you can plant in small spaces. Um, some of them are work better in pots and planters than others, but many of them you can plant in small spaces. So each of these crops we've got a crop card for, and on that card it gives you pretty detailed growing instructions as to what time of year to plant. Do you need to start planting them inside or outside? Um, how far apart do they need to be from each other, all of that kind of information. Because I know it can be a bit daunting as a coordinator if you're thinking, God, I'm not a gardener. Um don't try not to worry too much about it. We can say it's all process. If you don't have a good harvest, you're not going to be penalized for that. And to try and get students into that mind frame as well when they begin that um it's just about enjoying actually working on the garden. um, it can be hard to get, a bumper crop of carrots there. They can be a tricky one. But I will highlight here the easier ones to grow are things like radishes, spring onions, lettuces. They tend to have a good success rate. And my top tip is also to plant some herbs as well. Herbs can be really simple. You can plant them in a pot. You can really look after them, put them up on a windowsill where they won't be affected by the weather as much, and herbs go a really long way. So if you get to the end of the school year and you're like, gosh, most of these plants didn't survive well, what are we going to harvest? If you have a pot of basil, you can use that as something that you've produced, and maybe go and ask the students to bring in some local produce and cook with that and with your herbs, so you have a little kind of safety net there. We don't ask schools to grow over the summer, but some schools do. Some schools, for example, a lot of schools have left their potatoes in the ground and then harvested them in September. If it's anything like this summer and there's plenty of rain, you won't need to have worried about people coming in to water them. Um, and obviously, if you are really lucky and have a polytunnel, you can start planting much earlier. But those are our recommended crops. And then we also have recommended recipes. But again, these are just a starting point. So these were developed with a variety of chefs that we worked with when we were piloting this project. And again, we're very aware that not all schools have got, any cooking equipment. So we've tried to have a variety of recipes with some very, very simple that don't require any kind of cooking and minimal equipment, and then others that are a bit more complicated. So we kind of recommend that, when you do get to your time where you're beginning to harvest your crops, that maybe you could do a call out for a few chopping boards and mixing bowls and cutlery, and kind of keep them as a kit in the school so that as different classes are harvesting their crops, they can use them. And to flag this point here, this comes up quite a lot with our schools. People often ask about their action days. So you'll be used to having an action day where we tell you to try and get your whole school involved, celebrating your work on the theme at once. That's kind of a bit less practical with this theme because you might want to have your action day where you're celebrating by harvesting your vegetables, and each class or each group has planted something they'll be ready to harvest at different times. So you don't have to focus as much as doing everything together as a school, but I'll just give you a few ideas of things schools have done to make it a big event. They've had things like mini farmers markets where they'll invite parents and community members in to have a look at what they've grown and buy bits of vegetables, or maybe not buy them, but it can be a good fundraiser. They even have like a table at pick up and drop off where they just have the things they've harvested that day. Some schools have had competitions like a school bake off or a sustainable lunch day where a big picnic and everybody packs a lunch of the most sustainable lunch that they can bring in from locally bought and all of that kind of thing. Some schools will have a day of kind of like world cuisines where they'll bring in different foods and recipes from different countries around the world. And that links in really well with the global citizenship side. Again, you can invite parents and families to participate. So those are just a few ideas for you there. Just a few pictures of the growing actions. So you can see here that some schools, like down the bottom left here, they have raised beds. They're able to plant in them. Other schools, like here, you can see they're filling like pots with soil to plant in. And again, as I said earlier, you can use small containers for planting lots of things. It's a good opportunity to get people to go and look in the back of their sheds and see did they have any like broken wheelbarrows or old tires that they could donate. You can pretty much use any kind of container for growing as long as you can put a drainage hole in it. So don't be limited by thinking you have to go out and buy things. And then here's just a few examples of students cooking with the foods that they have produced, from simple salads to like chips and potatoes, bravas and stuff. And this was yeah, a bit of a display here in the middle of different foods from around the world. Okay, so moving on from the kind of the practical side to our global topics. So this is the area I said you might want to focus in your second year, where basically we ask each school to pick one of these 8 topics and do a bit of a deep dive into. So we've got a resource called Global Topic Cards, which gives you lots of information and suggestions and links for each of these. Um, so they are all actually quite strongly linked. So you might find that you're focusing on food waste, but you end up doing lots of work on food miles. So I'll just give you a brief look at each of them. So our diets and our rainforest, it looks mostly at things like palm oil, which is an ingredient in many, many products, and results in lots of the rainforest being cut down to grow the trees that produce palm oil, and the impacts of that. Then pesticides and wildlife looks at kind of organic farming, the impacts of pesticides on our crops. It can be a nice way to open up a discussion in your school about are there pesticides being used on your school grounds. Um, our diet and our climate looks at the connections between climate change and food production. And protecting pollinators is a nice kind of practical one where it's looking at the how much we need our bees and other pollinators to produce our lots of our foods. And again, you might be able to do some active work in the garden on this. Food waste, it's a really big topic in a lot of schools now anyway. Looking at how much food is wasted and the impact of that. And then food miles is looking at how far the foods that we eat travel, and how that affects the chemicals that need to be used in them and how they're packaged to reach us in a good state. Who is your farmer? It's kind of looking at the conditions for people working on the foods that we eat every day. It looks at things like fair trade and what that label actually means. And then crop diversity, it looks at the how the amount of different types of foods we eat has really reduced over the last 100 years and how that's affecting the environment. So these are a few examples of projects schools have done on them. As we said, we ask you to look at one. Some schools prefer to do more than one. You might, if you find a particular teacher, thinks that, oh, food miles will link in with something they're already planning, whereas a younger group wants to do something else, that's fine. And it's a good way to share the learning. You can maybe present them to different age groups as well. So these are just some of the resources that we have that will help you on your work on this theme. So the first one there, these are all links. So when you get the PDF of this, you can click on them all. This first one here is a really nice introduction. Um, it's all about the what you can gain or what you can learn by looking at the labels on the food packaging, and it kind of springs you into lots of those different global topics. from food miles to looking at whether it has palm oil in them, looking at whether it's organic, all of those types of things. So it's a nice introductory one. We have one on seeds, which might be helpful to do before you start planting. It looks at how seeds are produced, how they grow, and so on. Our crop cards I already mentioned, they're an important one for deciding when to plant, how to plant, etc. We have our recipes booklet, and then this is a link to our YouTube channel that has got quite a lot of videos of like I said, professional chefs who worked with us at the beginning of this theme, and they have created many videos that have cooking skills demonstrations, how to safely hold a knife, how to peel a vegetable, that kind of thing. And then also full demonstrations of different recipes. So we have, I think, about 5 or 6 different recipes done from things like patatas bravas to strawberry salads. And so there's a nice range there. And then we also have our global topic cards. So, just to summarize the action plan and what might be on it, as we said, it's kind of two main overarching aims. So, you'd be looking at increasing awareness by getting students the chance to spend time outside, um, tending their crops, putting up signage, getting families involved, developing your green code, looking at survey results, etc. And then practical improvements um, can range from the areas directly connected with growing food, and then more the areas that are just for wildlife and biodiversity. So in the picture here, these are grow bags. These are really nice things, and this school has used them to grow potatoes. And as I said, you can really use any container with drainage holes to grow food. We do have a nice resource that Sheila might share with you as well on our producing a cardboard bed. It's called an easy no dig bed. And rather than having to nail a load of planks together, you just lay cardboard on bare soil or grass and put 4 planks around it to hold the cardboard down, put some soil on top, and then you can start planting directly. Um, so that's quite a nice one as well if you do want a bit more space. So things like carrots, for example, need a bit more space. I wouldn't advise trying to put them in pots unless you're only doing like, 1 or 2 seeds. Um, so those are the types of planting spaces you might have. And then if you're creating spaces for wildlife, this is a good way to show students the links between um, biodiversity and growing. So for example, if you create habitats for birds, either by planting trees or by attaching bird boxes, you're hopefully going to bring birds into the area. And birds are very beneficial because they might eat things like slugs and snails that otherwise might be, eating your lettuce or spinach or whatever. Um, Same thing by creating something like a pond or a log pile or um, and some leaf mold. So that will attract things like frogs and hedgehogs, which again are very helpful for eating lots of insects that would otherwise be eating your crops. And then leaving areas unmanaged, like letting your grass grow and letting your hedge grow a bit wild, will bring in bees and other pollinators who will help out by, pollinating for if you're growing strawberries, for example, you need those there for the fruit to be produced. Okay, on to step 4 then. So step 4 is basically a repeat of step 2, apart from it, you do it in year 2. So it's looking back and seeing what has changed since you began working on this theme. So again, there's 2 essential actions. You repeat the awareness survey and you look again at your habitat map. You don't have to make a new one, but you look at it again and you see, can you mark on any changes? So, did you create new growing spaces? Did you add any new spaces for wildlife? Did you work out what the name of a tree was that you didn't know before? So those are all things you would add to your map. Um, and again, this that you'll be documenting those things on your application form. This, I keep meaning to change this slide. This is in the wrong order. So this is an example of your action plan. So that's back to step 3. So it just basically is showing you that when you're making your action plan, you want to add in the action that you wish to do, who's going to do it and when you want to do it. And that way, it's actually a good way of dividing up the work a bit. You can kind of almost assign jobs to different classes or groups or individual students and then share the action plan around. So you might say, oh, such and such group or class or students are going to make the habitat map. And here it is written in our action plan. So, get to it. Um, so that's sample is in our handbook. So you can take as many ideas as you like from that and obviously add in your own. Step five then is curriculum links. So basically it's having a look at the existing curriculum, whether you're in a primary or secondary, and seeing where can that link in with your work on this theme. So there's actually lots of potential links with this theme, at all kinds of levels from um maths to SCSE to history. If you're a secondary school, if you have a home ec or woodwork or there's all kinds of links there. And sometimes, it's just about chatting to other teachers and seeing what are they doing because there might be actions going on that you're not aware of. And we do have a template for curriculum links on the website that you can download. Maybe hang it up in the staff room and just ask people to fill in anything that they're doing with their class that is relevant. Step six then is informing and involving. So the focus of this is basically just making sure as many people as possible have a chance to participate and are aware of what you are doing. So it's basically spreading the word. So within the school, you might be, you're putting up your habitat map on the notice board. You're putting the results of the survey up. You're putting up the list of crops that you're growing. Um, Maybe you're sending around videos if you've got like a Moodle system or something similar in your school. But you could also be sharing the information more widely if you've got a school newsletter or a parish newsletter or a local newspaper. Could the students on the committee or in a class write a little piece about what they're doing and spread the word on how to plant, radish seeds so the people at home can do the same. Maybe it's inviting in parents when you're, clearing out raised beds or when you're harvesting your crops. Could you ask them to give you a hand? And as I said, the action day does not have to be one day. You can spread that across and have different kind of mini celebrations. And then step seven is the green code. I don't want to say lastly because you can actually do step seven, at the very beginning of your work on the theme. So you're creating a green code. Um, a code can be a short slogan, it can be a song, it can be a poem, it can be a full code of conduct. It's basically something that sets out what your school's attitude is to the environment and specifically to this theme. So it can be nice to do like a competition for this. Okay, so those are the seven steps. I think we have 5 minutes left. I just have a few more slides about upcoming events. But if you do have questions, get them ready for me. I can see there's lots in the chat. I'm not sure if that's Sheila or if they're questions, but I'll look in one sec. Um, so just a few things upcoming. So Tree Day, this just happened earlier today, and it was a really nice event. We do have got a recording of it that will be up on YouTube shortly. So that might be a nice one to watch back. But during November, we will be doing a series of webinars on the global topics. And I'll be emailing you about that. But we hope to have a few different webinars that will help you with your work on that. And there's also a really nice documentary that we did a workshop on last year. We're not going to do that same workshop this year, but you can still watch this documentary free of charge online. And it's all about kind of sustainable farming and soil and all kinds of kind of relevant things. It's a nice watch. And just giving a plug to our soil workshop again. I got a little bit soil crazy a few years ago and developed lots of resources on soil. So you might not all be as nerdy as that, but it is a nice thing to get stuck into at the beginning. And then just reiterating what Joanne said, if you're in your second year on the theme, you can apply this year. You must submit your application form by March 28th, and you must have your visit before then. So contact your EAO or contact myself or the Green Schools office if you don't know who your EAO is. And that visit can be any time during year two. Don't worry if you don't have everything done before that. We understand that you can't get that done. Check out the website, greenschoolsireland.org. We've got lots of resources up there, and we will very shortly have our new handbook available, and it'll be on a new theme page that has the kind of the important resources all together in one spot. And then sign up for our newsletter if you would like. There's lots of things going on with other themes. So I'll be emailing you roughly once a month with upcoming events, but you can also find out what's going on with the other themes with the newsletter. And then I also just wanted to reiterate this again, which Joanne mentioned about YRE, because the theme this year is nature restoration. And if you sign up to participate, you will get access to another free documentary. Sheila, I have a link to the trailer for it there in that document I sent you called Wilding. It looks really great. It's on my list of films to watch. So if you do register, you can watch that documentary with your students. Um, so there we are. I just about finished on time. So thank you very much for listening. I know that was a ton of information at once, but my main message to finish will be do get in touch with any questions because, we can't go and visit you in person, but we're happy to arrange a phone call or answer any questions by email. So, okay, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing. And if anyone has questions, um, let me know. Did I miss anything in the chat, Sheila?
No, no questions in the chat, and the links are shared. So we might just stop the recording there,
Yep.
and I'll save the chat.